everyone. I had no idea how to pronounce the band name either here with Rhyme Signatures, the nerdiest music review this side of being endlessly amused that the band made a video to educate us ignorant sorts about how you say the name correctly. And today we're going to be doing a review of the new AVKRVST album, the Approbation. I can remember quite vividly when I was browsing the internet and seeing news articles in 2010 that Steven Wilson and Mikael Åkerfeldt had decided to collaborate on a new project together. I was extremely hyped, as you can probably imagine, given that these two are frontmen of some of my favourite bands of all time, that of course being Porcupine Tree and Opeth respectively. The long 2 years that followed and subsequent release of Storm Corrosion in 2012 was an interesting experience to say the least. It was not what I was expecting, let me put it that way. I have still yet to decide more than 10 years later if this is an album I actually enjoy or not. It's a perfectly fine record, make no mistake, definitely crafted by people who knew what they were doing and what they had in mind to create. But ultimately, I think if I had to come to a decision, I would say that it wasn't really for me. This is fine though, as not everything is for everyone, even if it does come from a source that you have passion and love for. But there was still a seed of frustration and a seed of doubt left in me by Storm Corrosion. Call it a lingering sensation of missed opportunity to create one of the best fusions of two of the best bands in the genre. Thank goodness then for AVKRVST and their debut record, The Approbation. This feels like it is everything that I was hoping that Storm Corrosion would have been, even if it wasn't what Storm Corrosion ended up being. The similarities that are present on this debut record between the best parts of mid-2000s Opeth and mid-2000s Porcupine Tree are staggering. This feels like a record that has been cut from some very familiar cloth, but despite the similarities that this record does have to the obvious influences on the band, AVKRVST have been able to craft something that not only stands out by its own merit, but it is also enhanced by its familiarity with its influences. It is difficult when reviewing something, if a band is taking such broad and obvious prompts from other bands that have clearly had a massive impact on their sound. You need to be careful about making sure that you review the album for what it is, rather than what it reminds you of. Otherwise, you run the risk of belittling the efforts made by a band so early into their career. I am of the opinion that the influence is clearly present on the Approbation from bands such as Porcupine Tree, Opeth, Agalloch, Anecdoten, and so on and so forth, are genuinely to the benefit of the band rather than its detriment. It feels like the reliance on their influences puts the band in a place of respect and reverence of the material that they have been guided by, rather than feeling like a cheap, lazy and inconsequential knockoff. Now, there have been a fair few bands this year who have worn their influences on their sleeve to the detriment of the actual work they've put into their albums. But as I've already stated, I do not feel this is the case here. This is the collaboration between Steven Wilson and Mikael Åkerfeldt that I always wanted, and to have this in my hands, figuratively speaking at least for now, for me feels extremely special. The record is nicely structured, coming in at just under 50 minutes of music across 7 tracks, although that being said, it really is more like, 6 tracks, as the first track is 26 seconds long, and serves just as an atmospheric introduction into the first real song of The Pale Moon. But what a way to start a record. I have not felt this immediately engaged by an opening track in quite some time. The Pale Moon really is a perfect example of the band demonstrating their mission statement and just how well crafted they've been able to make this record. And it really doesn't take that long before the Opeth influences are felt, with this crunching riff reminding me of Ghost Reveries, and then this fantastic, gentle acoustic guitar section pulled almost directly from Damnation, specifically the track Window Pane. Vocally, I am reminded of equal parts Wilson and Åkerfeldt, but also of Bruce Sword from The Pineapple Thief. There's a certain nasal quality to the vocals, and I don't mean that in a negative fashion. It has this very particular texture and sound that recalls memories of albums like What Have We Sown and Wisdom of Crowds. That being said, the vocals on this record genuinely aren't that much of the overall experience. Considering that we have 6 main tracks on here, quite a lot of the record is devoted to its instrumental side. And now that's not to say that the vocals don't feature in significant parts on this album. There are still some songs on here where they are primarily driven by the vocals, but with tracks like Anodyne and the title track of the Approbation, the band are not afraid to allow their instruments to do most of the talking. And honestly, this is where I think the band shines the brightest, and as much as I do enjoy the vocal passages on this album and the lyrics, which are especially good, I don't feel it's the greatest strength of the band. I've often found purely instrumental albums to be kind of difficult to get into easily, and I must admit, when there were large stretches with no vocal delivery whatsoever within this album, I was a little bit concerned that I would start feeling that usual disconnect and apathy that I so often get from instrumental albums. I'm extremely grateful at this point to be able to say, of course, that the absence of vocals for distinct periods of time throughout the run of this record have had no negative impact on it whatsoever, and if anything, I feel this actually enhances the overall feeling and mood of the record and makes you appreciate the vocal sections that much more when they do happen. The atmosphere within the Approbation is absolutely spellbinding, and really does a great job of transporting you into the Norwegian wilderness where this record was honestly made. It seems odd that here we are halfway through June with the outside temperatures hitting about 30 degrees Celsius in the UK this week. God help me, we don't have aircon. But this album makes me feel like I should be sitting by a roaring fire, draped in a bearskin and telling ghost stories over a jug of mead. The record is honestly a joy to listen to, never feeling boring or a chore to get through. There's always something new or creative happening, be it an unexpected Hammond organ solo, crunching guitars soaring over the top of atmospheric keyboards, or the tasteful and Spartan use of growled vocals to accentuate the oppressive mood on any given moment during the album. The Approbation is one of the most engaging and immediately rewarding albums I've heard in 2023. Every single song on this album soars. There are no weak links here over the 6 main songs, with the initial salvo of The Pale Moon, Isolation, The Great White River and Arcane Clouds filling in what we can expect from the more immediate and attention-grabbing side of the music. But it's the final 2 songs, Anodyne and the title track of the Approbation, where Orkrust really reach out with their more textured, nuanced and atmospheric moments. There's a great variety to be found on these, both coming in at over 10 minutes long, from electronic sections that remind me of the soundtrack to video game Metroid Prime, to extended guitar solos that wouldn't sound out of place on the Steven Wilson album Hand Cannot Erase. These 2 tracks feel like an enormous payoff for an album that hasn't let off the acceleration from the moment that The Pale Moon kicked off. This record is such an incredible journey. There were multiple moments on my first listen where I nearly went full YouTube thumbnail face with how much I felt this record was bodying me with stellar moments of fierce, bold and exciting instrumental stings. And now that I've given this at least a half dozen listens, I find myself anticipating these moments. Just like how when you've ridden a roller coaster like 100 times and you have the sections where the track drops, where the hard left bank is coming. It generates an incredible sense of thrill and really does reward repeat listens immensely. So, what else can I say about Orkrust's The Approbation? I distinctly remember the hype for this band, for this debut record, building and building over the last few months. I recall hearing my peers and fellow prog reviewers talking about this one at length, but I held back from listening to any of the pre-release singles as I didn't want to listen to a third of the album before it dropped. Now, I am extremely grateful I held off and was able to approach this one in one complete unit rather than piecemeal, with the overall impact lessened by being overly familiar with a good chunk of the record. The Approbation is one to appreciate all as one piece. It feels like a singular unit, a solid block of atmospheric, addictive, beautifully composed and respectfully inspired art. I mean, okay, sure, the extreme familiarity on the great majority of this record may very well put some people off, with an easy dismissal of this just being another clone of bands who've done this kind of music before. But for me, I honestly felt this enhanced my experience, giving me a little window into what might have happened if some of my favourite bands had carried on down the path they were going, rather than Handbrake turning into new directions or even disbanding altogether. And I think that's the highest praise that I can give to Orkrust at this point. This feels like this is where Opeth would have ended up had they not made Heritage. There's the hallmarks of that band all over this record, but it's tempered with Orkrust's own identity, with their own messages and stories to tell. And if this is what they've led with out of the gate, then these guys could very well become one of the all-time greats of modern progressive metal. Recommendation is an extremely easy one here, guys. Grab this in physical format if you can. I've got the vinyl on its way. I think if you have even a passing interest in the heavier, folkier, more 70s inspired style of progressive metal from the mid to late 2000s, then you're going to have an amazing time with this one. And honestly, I can't wait to finish editing this video so I can go listen to this record again and again and again. This is all, of course, my opinion, as you know, guys. So if you have listened to the Approbation, please tell me what you thought about this record in the comments down below. If you did like this video, please share it around with anyone else you think would possibly enjoy it, and please do consider subscribing to the channel for more content. If you really love what I do as well, please do consider clicking the Ko-fi link in the description box down below to help support the channel. And until next time, guys, keep your rhyme signatures very odd.